Thank you. So I was told that you were learning some of the Gemaras about the afterlife and the awareness, the Gemara in Brochos, which talks about someone spending time in a graveyard and hearing conversations. So there's the question is, what is that? What actually happens after a person passes on that there allows them even to be conscious of this world? Like, what exactly is going on? And what actually is the state of a person after they live on? And some of the questions also were like, what happens in terms of like, there's different Jewish practices, different halachot in terms of mourning, that we say that for the first 3 days are called the days of bechi, the days of crying, the days of very harsh mourning. And then there's the laws of Shiva. So in the Shiva itself, in the 7 days, is the first 3 days, then there's 7 days. Then there's something that's called a Shloshim, which is 30 days. And then there's after a year, which is marked the idea of a person's yortzeit, which you mark a person's passing. And then there's a question of like, what happens after many, many years? You say you're marking someone's yortzeit and you're saying Kaddish for this person because to help this person have a soul elevation. And what happens to a person that passed away 100 years ago? This person doesn't need a soul elevation any longer. And what's with that person's memory? So to understand a little bit what this actually happens, it's obviously a very, very broad
Rabbi, you're muted.
Okay, where did you hear? Someone keeps unmuting me.
No.
Okay, did you hear, where did you stop hearing? I don't remember, I wasn't sure. Could someone speak and say where you stopped hearing me, or? Okay, I guess everyone's muted, so I can't hear anybody. We're saying that the laws of Shiva, you're with me with that? With the laws of Shiva of the 7 days, the laws of the 30 days, the laws of the entire cycle of a year, which is a yortzeit, to understand this process. Okay, so let's try to understand very, very quickly what is the definition of a soul, because we're talking about a person surviving after they live on. After they physically pass on from this world, there's a survival of the self. Now, what does that actually mean, that the self survives? And obviously from the Gemaras that you learned, from the different Talmudic readings that you learned, you see that not only does the soul survive, some type of spiritual quality of the person survive, but it seems clear also that this soul has an awareness, that it could communicate, it has an awareness. Now, how's that possible? Now, when people think about the soul surviving, what normally people think about is sort of like the engine or the electricity, the power that gives us, the energy that gives us our life vitality. But it would be similar, that would be an analogy of someone's computer goes, dies or something, everything is deleted, and they come to their store to fix their computer, and the person says there's good news and bad news. The good news is that your electrics, like the plug survive. We can actually reboot the computer. The bad news is that the entire hard drive is eliminated. So if you just have the electricity that boots the system and you don't have the actual system itself, that's not really an afterlife. So if we say that the soul survives is like the energy that gives life to the body survives, okay, that's very nice, but it has nothing really to do with us. Because when we define ourselves, and a good definition, a working definition of self would be our experiences, our memories, everything that we, all the intake, all the information, all the wisdom, every experience that we had up until this point would be that the self, the definition of self would be where our entire self of all our experiences of self in this memory, in this present moment is experiencing the present. And this storage of self, when we talk about the definition of self, of selfhood, like when you say you know somebody, or I know somebody. What does it mean when you know somebody? It means that you know the way the person thinks, the way the person feels, the way the person reacts. That's what it means that you know someone. When you know yourself, what does knowing the self mean? Knowing the self means exactly that. I know all my experience that I have up until this point, and based on the experiences that I had and the wisdom that I accumulated throughout my life, I know that if this situation arises, this is the way I'm going to respond. This is what it means that a person is self-aware. They know exactly who they are, what they want in this world, what they want to achieve in this world, what they want to be in this world, and they know how they're going to respond to life. All of that is accumulative of throughout all life experiences throughout a person's entire life. Now, all that self, which we'll call, let's say, the working self, all this definition of self is normally we think of it as being stored in the brain. And if it's being stored in the brain, you would imagine that as the brain is dying or losing its potential, more of the memory, which would be more of the self, becomes lost. So much so that you would say that at a moment of death, after a person passes on, the brain completely shuts down and therefore all the memory disappears. But there's a very interesting phenomenon, a physical phenomenon, is that people that are experiencing near-death experiences, where parts of the brain are actually shutting down, instead of experiencing less memory, they're experiencing more memory, which, according to the Torah, according to Judaism, this is very self-explanatory, because the memory of a person, the full memory, not the conscious memory. Conscious memory is what we remember, what you had for breakfast. That's just a little tiny part of your memory. But I'm talking about the full memory, every single experience, every single thought that you had, every single feeling that you felt, every single word that you spoke, everything, your entire self. All that memory is stored in the backdrop, which is called your soul. So your soul is the storage house of your memory, all your memory. And the basic difference between a person that's alive versus a person that just passed on is that when a person passes on, the brain shuts down. So it means that a person cannot create new memories because they don't have the capacity to see, to hear, to smell, to taste. They don't have their senses, and they don't have the brain to register the sense, what's occurring in the senses. So they cannot create new memory. But the totality of a person's memory is full at the moment of death. So your entire self survives death, the death of the brain. The entire self survives death. So therefore, in classic language of, let's say, in the Mishnah, or you find that also in the Gemara, in Shabbos, where it talks about a person does a din v'cheshbon. A person is going to be in front of the high court and is given a din v'cheshbon of their entire life. They're given an accounting of their entire life. What does that actually mean? That a person is given an accounting of their entire life? It actually means that their entire life becomes revealed to them. Every single experience, every single thought, every single feeling, everything of their life becomes revealed to them. That is actually what a din v'cheshbon means. That's the din, the judgment, and the accountability, and everything becomes revealed according to the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. You see your life not necessarily as your own life. First, you see your life as someone else's life. You see this entire narrative, and you're not conscious that it's your own life, but you see it as someone else's life. And they ask you, the question is asked to you to judge that other person's life, which is really you. You actually give the judgment on your own life. And then you're told that the judgment you dispense upon this other person's story is actually your story, and you just rewarded yourself, or the opposite. So it's always good to judge favorably people, because it's good for this life and good for the next life. This is one idea. So the understanding is that the entirety of self survives. The difference between pre-living and versus person passing on is whether the person can create new conscious memory. And this is related to one of the ideas of why we do a yard site and we memorize people or memorialize people. We give charity for a person's honor, or we learn Torah for a person's honor. We say Mishnayos. We do all different types of customs to preserve the person's memory. Which we're saying is that through our actions, if let's say we're a child or a spouse are related to someone that just passed on, our actions, because we're interrelated on a spiritual level, our actions create new memory for the person that has already passed on. Because normally when a person passes on, there's no longer any memory because there's no longer any tools to create memory. So the person's story ended. The entire story ended. Whatever that story was that the person wrote throughout their life has been published. That's like the completion of their story. When a person is connected to this other person in this life, and they do something in this world, they do a good deed, they give charity, or they learn Torah, they do something, or they say Kaddish, they do something in honor of the person's memory, they create new experiences, new memory for the person that passed on. Now, this is generally what occurs, but there's processes. So just like the soul enters in stages, the same thing also the soul exits the body in stages. So we have to understand that the soul is sort of like what we'll call like the backdrop of your life. It's the space that contains all your memories and all your experiences. The soul already has, before it comes down to this world, has already a particular quality. And because it has a very particular quality, it manifests and it's revealed in a particular body through which it could articulate that particular soul mission. So every soul has something that's called a tikkun, a individual specific purpose why the soul came down to this world. Every person has that, which means that every person, a person could be a very pious person, a very religious person, do all the mitzvahs, etc., but there's something very unique in their character that every single person is unique. There's something very special about this person and different one person from the next. And that difference is reflected in a particular mitzvah that they feel most resonates with them. So there's a mitzvah that the sages call Zahir Tfei. There's a mitzvah that they feel they shine more brightly through that mitzvah. That's the particular mitzvah that they have. Let's say one person says, like, I really like giving charity. I do all the mitzvahs, I do everything that I have to be doing in this world, but when I give charity, it really resonates with me. Another person says, when I put on tefillin, that really resonates. Or when I pray, that really resonates. Or when I keep Shabbat, that really resonates. Every person has their specific mitzvah that's connected to their soul. So the soul has a particular trait, if you wish, a particular style that is manifest, that is revealed in your particular body. And the reason why you have your body, and your wife or your children have their body, and someone else has a different body, is because your body, which is your genetic pattern that would be brought up in this particular place, and these will be your parents, and this will be your education, and this will be the context through which your life unfolds, is very specific to your soul mission. That your soul comes down and specifically to your body to live your life in the context that you were born into, because the soul realizes that the way it can achieve its tikkun, its soul elevation and articulation, is when it's specifically in your body. So there's a distinction of the soul, and there's a particularity of the soul that enters into your particular body. But the soul does not enter in one time. It's actually processes. The soul actually enters in processes, and it mirrors, the reflection also mirrors on the other end, which is that the soul actually leaves the body in stages. Just like the soul enters the body in stages, the soul leaves the body in stages. When a child is born, even a fetus in the womb, already has a soul, but the soul is not yet revealed. And the soul is revealed in stages. The first stage is at birth. There's a beginning of that stage. First, obviously, as a fetus in pregnancy, there's the first stage. Then at birth, it goes a little stronger. And then if the child is a male, at the bris, the soul enters into a stronger level. And then at 12 or 13, a bar mitzvah, the soul enters in a stronger level. And then at 20, it enters in even to a stronger level. And at 50, it finally integrates with the body. This is the way the soul enters. And I'll explain you how that works. There are two dominant forces in the human being. One is called, in the classic definitions in the Talmud, the way that the Gemara talks about these two qualities, one is called the Yetzer Tov, the positive inclination, and one is called the Yetzer Hara, which is the negative inclination. In Hasidic language, one is, which is a little bit different idea. It's not just a yetzer, an inclination, but it's almost two different souls. One is called the nefesh habahamit, which is like the animal soul of man, and one is called the nefesh elokit, which is the divine aspect of the soul, of the person. There are two souls within a human being. What that means is that we have two almost competing forces. One force is animalistic. Animalistic doesn't necessarily mean negative, it means purely egoic. The animal soul wants to survive. That's exactly what it wants, and it only wants that. It wants to survive and strive and thrive. This is what the animal soul wants. The animal soul is a soul that we share with every single animal. Every single animal in the wild, whether it's a zebra or a lion sitting in the Serengeti, has this animal soul. The animal soul of the animal forces the animal to go hunt, to go eat, to go protect itself from the shade. And the same thing also when it's being hunted. If it's a predator chasing it, it'll run away. This is the natural instincts of the animal. This level of soul is also reflected even in the soul of every single thing that exists, and in a more less intense form. Let's say there's a tree. A tree has a life force. The life force of the tree wants to preserve itself. Therefore, a tree will bend its leaves towards the sun rays to receive nourishment. The tree will know if a pesticide is attacking another tree, the other tree will release a signal to the second tree that it should protect itself. There's a level of communication, not obviously conscious communication, where everything in this world has a self-preserving quality. This is called the nefesh habahamit or nefesh akiyumit. Different names for this. There's various different names. Maimonides has one name, and Sadigon has a different name, and there's many different names for this soul. But it's the preservation of self. That's the one level of soul, or one type of soul. There also that we have also another soul, which is called the nefesh elokit, the divine aspect of self, where it says in the beginning of the Torah, where it talks about the creation of the human being, of Adam Chava, it says, Vayipach ba'apav nishmat chayim, that Hashem blew into his nostrils a breath of life. V'hi l'adam nefesh chayim, man became a living being, which means that we have a part divinity within us. We have a part that was blown into us from the Creator, which makes us a creator, not a creation. And the difference is that we have a part of us that is also selfless. We have a part that is very selfish, that wants to preserve the self, and all it thinks about is the self. And then we have a part of ourself which creates the possibility of being selfless, being divine, being caring, being connected to Hashem, being in service of others. This is the higher part of ourself. This is the two parts of self. And the nefesh habahamit, the animal soul, the animalistic part of the soul, is not a negative trait. In the language of the Medrash Tanchuma, you actually make it negative. You create something that's wrong. If you're, let's say, hungry, let's say you're thirsty, you're walking down the street, and you see a little child walking with a bottle of water, you're thirsty. Now, if you're just the preservation of self, if you're just acting from an animalistic place, and you're like a wild lion in the zoo or somewhere, what would you would do? You would actually grab the bottle of water from that other child and drink it because you're thirsty. So what tells the human being not to do that is something that is called a higher self. The higher self, the higher dimension of self says, yes, you are thirsty, but so is the child, and the child actually owns this water, and you have no right to it. So the idea of recognition of other and the selflessness of self is something that actually comes with time. Because a child that is born, a small little child, right after birth, is they're actually not aware that they're self-ends. They're very, very selfish. Children are very selfish. It's cute, but they're very selfish. Children don't actually even know till a certain period of time that their body ends. That's why if you ever look at little children, they're looking at the tips of their fingers and they're recognizing that all of a sudden, wait a second, my body ends and another person's body begins. But as a young little infant, the child actually thinks that the mother is an extension of the self, and therefore the child, it's 2:00 in the morning and the child cries for to be fed. or to be changed, because the child is living in a very selfish world, which is good, which it's healthy. Otherwise, God forbid, the child can starve to death. But a child lives like that. And slowly you see that the way children work, if you look at a little child, like a 3-year-old, you try to take away their toy, they'll be distraught. It'll be the end of the world. But slowly, as they become a little more mature, they realize, like, wait a second, I can share my toys with somebody else, which is like a level of selflessness where they recognize that there's an other. So the awareness of other, which means the concept of the nefesh, the divine soul, of the higher soul, enters the body in states. Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of people that can be 90 years old, that's not 9 years old, and they still have the spiritual maturity of a child. And therefore, if you try, God forbid, to take away their toy, whatever their toy is, or to take a little charity from them, they go completely ballistic. But the healthy development of the human being is that we go from a place where we're very selfish, where we're preserving the self, which is the nefesh habahamit, to the place where we become the nefesh alukit, the divine soul, the animated, the spiritual soul, the transcendent soul, the selfless soul slowly enters into stages. So then it enters into maturity, which is 12 and 13, which is one level of maturity where it enters. A deeper level is when a person is 20. That's generally a time that the sages say that a person can actually do positive transactions, financial transactions. That's, scientifically speaking, that's when the brain is finally formed. The brain is actually developing in a teenager still, and it's not finally formed. And then the highest level is neshama, the soul, comes from the word related to the word nun shana, 50 years, where the soul finally integrates into the body. These stages are mirrored in the second and at the end of life, that the soul leaves in stages, doesn't leave completely at one time. And that will be mirrored in the stages that we have of Shiva and Shloshim and Yartzeit, etc. And the way it works is like this. According to the Zohar, and this is also brought down by many of the great rabbis, the Ramban and Kanti or Tzioni, many of the great sages, and also brought down even in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, in the laws, and speaking about Hoshana Rabbah, that 30 days before a person passes on, before a person leaves the world, parts of their soul, of their transcendent, what is called the Or Makif, the surrounding light of their soul, which in a very loosely translated, but it's not a real accurate translation, would be called like a person's light that surrounds the person's body. This leaves 30 days before a person passes on. So therefore, the sages speak about something that's called hargasha sa'aver, where a person can sense that a person is already transitioning into another stage. Or sometimes, people that have passed on, they gave intimations that they already knew that they're going to pass on to the next life already before they passed on. And it's not just a coincidence, it's because there's something begun the process of leaving their body. And this is the Or Makifim of a person, 30 days before a person passes on, also on a Hoshana Rabbah, and it'll come back. This is what happens. Then when a person passes on, so there's actually a few things that happen here. Number one, the nefesh, the soul, the lowest level of the soul, which is connected to the nefesh hamakayim, which is the soul that gives existence, that doesn't leave the body. And therefore, the person, the body, let's just talk about the body doesn't immediately decompose. It actually takes a longer period of time, which means that there's still a force, a life force that exists within the body. That's called the nefesh hamakayim, the soul that gives existence. What leaves the body is the animating force of the soul. The animating force of the soul leaves the body. Now, the soul, throughout his 90, 100, whatever, 120 years that the soul lived in this body, becomes so identified with the body, because remember, the soul is the backdrop, and the soul in the beginning of life, at the end of the life, the soul has all the memory of the entire person's experience. But the soul gains experiences and gains memory through the body, right? That's the medium through which the soul gains experiences. So the soul becomes identified with the body. Because the soul becomes so identified with the body, the soul, even after it severs from the body and there's a separation between the soul and the body, the soul doesn't want to leave the body. The soul eventually has to transition into a spiritual state and let go of the body. But for the first 3 days, the soul hovers around the body itself. That is the reason why in Jewish law, there's something that's called Shalish Lebechi. The first 3 days is for mourning. It's even when there's a Shiva, the general custom is not to visit a mourner for the first 3 days of mourning, or else it's relatives or family, but generally not to visit for the first 3 days, because that's very intense state, because the soul is still connected to the body. When a person does a Shiva call, you're paying a Shiva call and you're visiting someone.
That makes sense.
The paying respect is not only for the living, you're also coming to comfort the soul itself. And the reason with the comforting of the soul is when a person comes to Shiva and speaks about the soul and says, you know, this person was such a wonderful person, they did such amazing things in this world, and they speak what of the accomplishments of this person that lived in this world, the soul actually takes comfort of that. Because when the soul leaves the body and it recognizes that it can no longer create new memory and do positive things in this world any longer, sometimes the soul may have some regrets, like, oh, I wish I would have done that. I wish I could have done that. I wish I could have repaired that thing or the other. And the soul can be sometimes, I don't want to say tormented, but it can be painful for the soul to say, okay, I just squandered my chance to achieve something in this world, and now I'm existing without a body. I don't have the medium through which to create any positive new experiences. So one of the things of going to a Shiva and visiting someone that's going through mourning is not only to give comfort for the people that are alive, but to also give comfort for the person that actually passed on. So that is precisely one of the reasons why we don't go to visit a Shiva. We don't go to Shiva for the first 3 days, because the first 3 days, the soul is predominantly next to the body, in the vicinity of where the body is, because the soul feels very attached to the body, and it recognizes that the body, that's where it spent, 90, 100 to 120 years in the body, therefore wants to be connected to the body. Slowly, and it's a process, it's a slow process, it's not a sudden process. Slowly, the soul start recognizing that my next step in my journey is not an embodied journey. I don't have to be in a body to continue my existence. I can exist without being connected to a body. So then the soul says that for the next 4 days, which will be the next days of the Shiva, the soul basically moves back and forth from the home of where it lived, or the children live, preferably where the soul actually lived, the house where it passed on, or the place where it's living, there, and the place of its body. So basically, according to the Zohar, according to Yerushalmi, it actually moves back to these two places. So what you're doing during Shiva is you're comforting the people that are in mourning, that they just lost their parent or whoever they lost, and you're also comforting the soul, telling the soul that you can let go, you can transcend, you can be in a spiritual space, you can enjoy the eternal bliss, you can go to Gan Eden, whatever the process of the afterlife experience, you can start that process. So the soul is still like ambivalent for the first 7 days. Like, where does it exist? Does it transcend the physical realm, or it's still connected? So the soul still hovers around the home and the place of its burial. After 7 days, it slowly starts rising, which means rising means it slowly starts detaching itself from being connected to the body, and the recognition that it's having its next phase in its existence will be disembodied, without a body. So the soul starts rising, and it still hovers around this world for the first 30 days. And then slowly for the next year, it's rising higher and higher, or deeper and deeper into spiritual realms, that it's no longer physically connected to the body. And that's actually one of the reasons why we say Kaddish. One of the reasons why we say Kaddish after a person passes on is to help in the soul elevation. Or if you ever see this in Hebrew, it's called Aliyat HaNeshama. You'll say that a soul should have an aliyah, a soul should have an elevation, which means that the soul is elevating itself from this physical realm. However, from what you learned in the Gemaras, you see that the soul actually is also very much aware of this world, so much so that the soul can actually communicate, because there's still a part of the body, even after 120 and even after many, many years after a soul passed away, there's something that's called the luz bone, which is like a tiny, small part of the body, tiny bone, and it's debated amongst the Rishonim exactly where this bone exists, if it's at the tip of at the end of your skull, or it's at the top of your spine, or the bottom of your spine. We're not exactly sure where this part is, and it could be tiny as an atom, but there's a part that Chazal, the Medrash says, that is indestructible. And that's the part of the soul, that's the part of the body that will always remain in this physical world until the time of Tchias HaMesim, until the time of the resurrection, where the soul will be resurrected from that part of the body. Because there's always a part of the body that still remains in this physical realm, connected to the place where it's actually buried, and it can never be destroyed, not by fire, not by water. This is the language of Chazal, the language of the Medrash. Therefore, the soul, through this channel, of this luz bone, of this tiny little bone, will always be possible for the soul to revisit and re-see and be conscious of what's going on in this world, because it's still attached to this world at some level. So when we're talking about the soul elevating itself and transcending this world, we're not talking about becoming not aware of this world, because the soul has still people loved ones that it left, children or a spouse, whatever were left in this world, that the soul still feels connected to and wants to be connected to, but it exists without the anxiety, without the tension, without the nerves of being connected to this world. So they can observe their children and the life of all their loved ones, how it's unfolding, but it doesn't have the same anxiety of, let's say, seeing something that's troubling, like a parent sees something that's troubling with a child, it can create a lot of angst. But the soul can see it without the anxiety. It can pray for the child, and according to the Zohar, the merit of the children are sustained through the schus, through the merit of their ancestors. So they can pray for the child, they can observe their loved ones, but they don't have that same anxiety of what, because they have this certain sense of detachment. And this detachment slowly, or this rising to a higher spiritual realm, occurs first through 3 days, then the 7 days, then the shloshim, which is the 30 days, then the yortzeit is the year, and then slowly it starts rising higher and higher until about 50 years. That's the general number. And once it's 50 years past living on this world, the soul really becomes completely disinterested in this world. Predominantly, this is considered a yovel, it's considered a full-time period of time, but predominantly because the people that they love, the people that are connected to, are also probably no longer alive, and it's the next generation, so they become disinterested. And that's why we don't say Kaddish for someone that lived 100 years ago generally, because they don't need our elevation already. They're already elevated from this world, they have no connection, and they're already transcended to the place of the higher realms, and therefore they don't need the elevations of our own souls. So again, just like the soul enters in stages into the body, the soul also exits the body in stages. First, the or makifim, the surrounding lights, leave the soul before 30 days, and then slowly the soul leaves the body, and the nefesh hamakayim still exists within the body. The surviving, the sustaining souls exist within the body. It leaves in 3 days, 7 days, 30 days, a year, 50 years, and slowly it elevates into a state. What the soul actually experiences is what if the totality of the person's experiences are all positive and holy and noble, which means that the person lived like a full tzaddik, then the entire memory of the person, because the memory of the person is what contains all the experiences of the person, all the person's thoughts and feelings and expressions and everything that they experienced, all the words they spoke and the thoughts they had, the totality of the entire self survives and becomes part of this what we'll call like this individual memory, becomes part of the collective memory of Hashem. And therefore it exists within like an eternal blissful state of awareness of God. So who exists? the fullness of yourself, the totality of yourself, experiencing the oneness of Hashem. This is what the sages call, or the Torah calls, Gan Eden. This is what's called paradise. The process of the opposite of Gan Eden, which is what is translated as hell or Gehenna, is not what most people think, which is not a very Jewish idea. Like there's demons and there's fire and the people are trying to burn you and little angels. The process of Gehenna is basically the soul needs to get back to Gan Eden. The soul needs to get back to paradise, needs to get back to the oneness with Hashem. It came from God. It has to return back to God. It has to go back into this spiritual, blissful state. But the problem is that it could be that a person lived their life and they have negative experiences. They have negative memories. They did negative things in this world. They did averot. They did negative things in this world. So what actually has to happen, and this only happens for the first 12 months after a person passes on. And afterwards, after the mishpat of Rishonim is only 12 months. That after 12 months, the soul already expunges itself. So the soul needs to erase certain memories. So imagine like it's a sponge. Like Gehenna is a sponge that draws out those negative memories, those negative experiences. The soul becomes aware of the negative experience, the negative thought, the negative action that it did in this world. It becomes very painful for the soul to become aware of it, because now they recognize the truth of the way, how they should have acted, how they should have been. And that is reflected in what is called Gehenna of fire or Gehenna of ice, which is sort of like a level of embarrassment of self. You know, when you do something and you know this is the wrong thing to do, but you did it, and then 5 minutes later you recognize that you shouldn't have done it. Like, you know, you say something to somebody and then you say, oh, I shouldn't really have said that. That's what Gehenna is. Gehenna is like the recognition, like, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. And that's slowly the way that the soul expunges from itself that negative memory. That's the cleansing process of the soul just recognizing that it was a wrong thing to do and becoming embarrassed, whatever embarrassment on that state means, but some type of recognition of the negative thing that was done, letting go of it, and another memory, negative memory coming up, letting go of it, and slowly the soul, you know, discharges all these negative experiences and thoughts and actions that it did in this world, and what is retained of this soul is only the positive actions and the positive thoughts and the positive words, and that remains for eternity. That, you know, imagine this in another metaphor would be like, you know, like life, you begin life in a blank sheet of paper and you write your story moment to moment. Every thought that you have, every word that you speak, every action you do is writing another word on the paper. And then at the end of life, you have the book. And at the end of life, the book has to be published, and it's going to be published in the memory of Hashem, in the memory of God. So if the book is written as a beautiful book, and every single action you did was positive, and every single thought you did, and you did live a very high exemplary life, then of course this book is, the totality of this book is now published, and you fully live eternally. Now, what happens if, like, okay, 90% of the book is okay, but like, you know, between 18 and 19, you like really messed up. And like, you know, you cheated here, you lied here, you did this aver here, that aver here. Okay, generally it's a pretty good book, but it needs a little bit editing. So the process of Gehenna, of the afterlife process, is actually the editing process, where that is taken out, that is taken out, that is taken out. That's why in the image of the Torah, when it talks about someone that really did a terrible, terrible thing, so the Torah says that this person experiences kares, like is cut off. Or like in Hebrew, there's an expression, like, God forbid, if we talk about like when we talk about a real terrible person, we'll say Yimach Shemoy, may his name be erased. But his name be erased means that let his story disappear. Like let's press delete on his hard drive, because this person lived such a terrible life that there's nothing redemptive. That's what Yimach Shemoy is. And then when you say about a tzaddik, you say Zecher Tzaddik Levarcha, the person's memory should be a blessing, because the person's full memory exists. And the more a person lives on a spiritual realm, the higher a person lives on the spiritual realm, the more of the person's memory actually survives. So that's basically what Gan Eden is, what Gehenna is, the process of the soul elevation. And obviously there's a lot more to talk about. But I think we'll take a few minutes for questions so we can.
That's great. Thank you very much. So it looks like Yehuda, you have your hand up. Did you want to ask the rabbi a question?
Sure,
Yes.
sure.
So you said the process of the neshama coming into the body is gradual,
Yeah,
and that at the other end, the leaving of the body is also gradual.
correct.
Now I learned that every night the soul leaves the body, and that's like 1/60th of death. Is that also a gradual process?
The soul leaving the body is not fully the soul leaving the body because a person is
Right.
still alive, right? Obviously. So it's a 60th of the soul, so to speak, leaving the body. And that's also in a process. Like when you're going to sleep, you don't actually enter fully into sleep or into like a REM state or a higher state of a deeper level of sleep, only in stages. So as you're entering deeper states of sleep, the more of your soul, the 60th level of your soul, is actually departing your body. That's why also when you wake up, the soul slowly enters into the body also as well. That's why it's not healthy to jump out of bed. Physically, it's not healthy, and also spiritually. The Torah, the Shulchan Aruch says that a person is gaber ka'ari, that a person has to wake up in the morning like a lion. Did you ever see a lion waking up? A lion wakes up very slowly. It gets up like a lion, but it doesn't jump out. It's not like a monkey. It doesn't jump up. It gets up. It gives a roar. It stretches itself, and then it gets out. So you should get up like a lion, strong but slowly. It's a process of getting up. It's the same. It mirrors the same thing, and that's correct. It still enters into the body slow stages, and enters into the body in slow stages in the morning.
Thank you.
Short, but in slower stages. Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I don't see any. I have one question. Who does?
Yes, I have a
Ben.
question.
All right, Ben.
Yes.
I think Ben, you had a question, and then Phyllis. Go ahead, Ben, and then we'll go to Phyllis.
Okay. What's the question?
Go ahead,
Ben
Ben.
wanted to ask, yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna
I
ask.
wanted to ask, in the Gemara, we learned that the children of Iyar said that the body feels the worm crawling on it. How long would that process continue?
Oh, so that
That's what I'm gonna
process. I don't. Did everyone hear the question?
No, he broke up. Ben, you're
Okay,
still
so the
breaking
question is-
up from when you ask questions, unfortunately.
The question was that the Gemara talks about that kosher rima lemes, that the body feels the worms of the connected to the body. The soul feels the worms eating the body. That actually there's a consciousness that's connected. Now, that same Gemara is also mentioned in Sifra Kabbala and other sources, and it says that by a tzaddik, the tzaddik doesn't feel that pain. And the reason for that is it depends how connected the person is to their body. Now, this is not physical pain. It's something that's called, what we'll call, you ever heard of the idea of phantom pain? Phantom pain is that when a person, let's say, God forbid, loses an arm or loses a finger, whatever, loses a limb, if someone touches them in the place where their limb existed, even though they're physically not feeling any pain, but their reaction will be as if they're feeling physical pain. Because they identified that their arm exists in this place, when something touches there, they would feel the pain as if it's touching their body. This is the same thing in relationship to the body. The soul leaves the body, right? Which means that the soul doesn't actually feel physical pain that's connected to the body, but the soul awareness is so intimately connected to the body that when something is done to the body, the soul feels as if it's feeling the pain. Identifying with the body so strong that it feels the pain. That's like the phantom pain. That's why it says that a tzaddik doesn't experience kafakela and chibud hakever. This is chibud hakever. This is called chibud hakever. That the soul doesn't, a tzaddik doesn't experience that because the tzaddik is someone that recognizes that I was in this body for 120 years. This was my way of living this world. And the moment the soul leaves the body, it says, okay, fine, I got it. I now move on to the next stage. I'm not attached to the body. There's an image from Reb Sadia Gaon, one of the great Gaonim in the 9th century, the 10th century. He writes that imagine a person has a home, and they live in this home, and they're very attached to the home. And one day they're walking home, and they see their home on fire. So how much pain will you experience by seeing your home on fire? Well, that depends how much you love your home. If you're so connected to the home that this is where you live and you're so connected to it, you're going to feel a lot of pain. But if you're about to sell the home and you're about to move and you don't care about the home and you say, okay, I don't really like this house, it's haunted, I have to move anyways, whatever the reason why you don't like this house, you see it on flames, you may say, okay, fine, I'll collect insurance money, I'm fine. I don't really care about the house. So it depends on your relationship to the house will be the relationship of the pain. The same thing also with regards to when the sages talk about that the soul experiences pain of the maggots eating the body. It depends on what type of relationship the soul had with the body. If it feels really intimate, connected with the body, it's going to experience much more pain. If it experiences less intimate with the body, it's going to experience less pain. But the soul eventually will not identify with the body. Eventually, it's going to recognize that it moves into another state, and whatever happens to the body is not going to feel any pain, even phantom pain it won't experience.
Okay, Phyllis, does that answer
Yes.
your question as well?
No, I have other questions.
Go ahead.
Relating to the luge bone and relating to the victims of the Shoah, especially those who were cremated, and even those Jews who they're not religious or for whatever reasons they're cremated, what happens to their luge bones or to the luge bones of those who have passed, if there's a distinction between those and the victims of the Shoah? And what happens to those souls? Will they have Tikiyat Mason? And I'm very concerned. How are these people still connected to the world, or to us, or to their?
So the place, the medrash where the sages talk about the luzbon, one of the things that it says clearly about the luzbon is it cannot be destroyed by fire. That God forbid we don't have to think of this image, but just because a person was burned and cremated in Auschwitz, chas v'shalom, to say that the person doesn't have chiyas hamesim. And it's very clear that even nothing in this world can ravage and destroy that luzbon. Nothing possible in the physical world can change that. And therefore it has no applications at all to the conversation of chiyas hamesim. And the reason why we don't practice cremation, and according to halacha, we have to bury the body, has not to do with chiyas hamesim necessarily. It's really to do with the kavod hames, the honor of the body. That we believe that the body, gufton lohin kadishin, that the body is a sacred thing, and as a sacred thing, it's the body that we live through in this through our journey through life. It's the body that we service through this body. Therefore, it's a sacred thing. It's a holy thing, and it should be treated as a holy thing. And what we do with holy things in general is we bury them. That's what you do with the Sefer Torah. That's what you do with anything that's holy. We say, let nature take its course. We are not going to do anything to that body. If this is the body, we're going to put it in the earth and let the earth do what it naturally does, because it's a sacred thing. The person's body is a holy thing. That's the reason why we don't.
Agreed, but what happens to them if they decided that if they were cremated?
I don't know. Hashem will decide. I don't know.
I mean their nishamot are still are in Gan Eden, or
sure the same thing. What's the difference? I don't know. It's like any other there. I don't know. Doesn't change. I'm not saying obviously we shouldn't cremate, but if God forbid a person was cremated, whatever, okay, so a person ate treif also. I mean, there's some people do avers. It's a different conversation. That's Hashem's cheshbon. Hashem will do the calculations. I'm not playing God. It's like any other negative thing that a person did. But it doesn't mean that a person that was intentionally cremated loses their portion from the world to come, God forbid, or doesn't have chiyas hamesim. That's not true.
Okay, Phyllis?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. Anybody else have any other questions they have of the rabbi? I have a couple of questions, if I may.
Sure.
One is, you talked about, if the wicked individual goes to Gehenna, and then through the expunsion of the wickedness, let's say, and then he rises to Gan Eden, what do you call that middle ground as that individual expunges the evilness to be able to then elevate the Gan Eden? Is there a name for that particular area of transition?
There is. There's a lot of different words for that. One is called Olam Adimyon, the world of imagination. It could also be connected to something that's called the Guf Dak, the ethereal body. There's various different words in Kabbalistic sources for this transition period.
And that can be of any length of time, given the wickedness that has to be expunged. Or
our sages say that the reason why we say Kaddish for 11 months for everybody,
right,
life, because the sages say, the Mishnah says in Iyar that it's a full cycle. A year is a full cycle. So the soul has to go through even the worst possible soul has to go through one full cycle of expunging. And the reason we say Kaddish for 11 months, because we say our parents, let's say, are not, God forbid, wicked. They didn't go through 12 months. So we're not going to do the full 12 months. We're just going to do 11 months, symbolically saying that even if there was a tiny little thing that had to be expunged, we're going to do that for them. But not going to go through the full month. 12 is the maximum. It doesn't go longer than that. Of course, there's always, every rule has exceptions to the rule, where there's some extreme cases where a soul has to come back in a reincarnation, where soul has to transmigrate to other forms of life to reach elevations. But this is the general idea of a 12 months process.
Okay, and one other question I have is when you began sharing with us, and when we read from the Brochos yesterday, one of the lines was, well, do the deceased know what's happening in the world today? And the way you described the process is the brain is part of the neshama, and eventually the brain is consumed by the neshama for that person to behold as his or her neshama. And then they enter Gan Eden. And so for me does that mean that we don't have to deal with all of the nourishkeit that continues to go on in the world?
Exactly.
That we are there in history to be reunited with our loved ones.
Correct.
That we can then quell with.
Correct. That's what it means.
That's important for me to know. I hope for others as well.
Yes, no, it's very important. In fact, the Zohar says that that's the greatest pleasure for the soul, to be reunited with its loved ones. But the reunited with his loved ones means with the loved ones with their fullness of themselves, the full memory.
Right.
So the soul, what I was saying is that the soul still can be observing this world, if it wants, it can know this world. It can go through the Lizbo and become conscious of this world. And if it's a parent, that it can observe what the life of the child is happening, but without the narishkeit, without the anxiety, without all the pettiness that comes along with it. It sees a bigger picture and says, okay, whatever, you'll get over it. It's fine. So that's like a sort of like a hovering view of what's going on.
And do we have the ability to at least view the lives of those we love who are still on Earth?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Full 50 years.
Okay, good. I just needed that reinforcement.
Yes. Till about 50 years. Total 50 years. 50 years. And once it's 50 years, the soul already becomes disinterested. It's like the life of your great-grandchildren. It's like not so interesting to you anymore.
But someday they will join us.
They will join us. Yes. There's something I didn't talk about, which is called there's something that's called the Adam Kadmon, which is like primordial being, like it's an image of Adam and Eve, and souls come from different parts within Adam and Eve's body, and the souls reunite with their own souls in the great structure of Adam and Eve. So let's say you're a soul that comes from the hand of Adam, your wife is part of the hand of Adam, your children part of the hand of Adam, and all these souls eventually are returned back into this great cosmic soul in that area. So the souls are constantly reunited with their loved ones. And again, like I said, the Zohar says that's one of the greatest pleasures for the soul, to be reunited with its loved ones.
Okay, I have one more question, but I don't want to hog it, as they say.
Yeah, I want to ask about that.
You want to say something? Go ahead, Phyllis.
We're interested to know about like the resurrection of the dead, which is Tiata Mason, but we're also wondering, or at least my friend was, if people have different Gilgulim, if there are different reincarnations, yes. I don't know what it might depend upon, but are they all going to come back? How does this, I mean, are they different souls, or is this the same soul? Yes, they are in different bodies.
Okay, the answer is, the short answer is they will all come back, and they're different aspects of the soul. To explain that will take at least another hour. So I would suggest that you pick up the book called The Jewish Book of Life After Life, and one of the chapters in that book. And if you don't want to read, you could actually hear it. It's an audio book as well. And it's by me, and you can get it on Amazon. You can get it today, right now. And there's a chapter on reincarnation, which explains this whole thing in great depth, because that's one of the big problems of reincarnation. It seems to say that every soul gets another reincarnation, and the souls constantly reincarnate. So then who's resurrected? Because then it would be the same soul. And then there's a whole complicated system, but the short answer for that is that, yes, every single person that experiences in this world and did mitzvahs and did positive things in this world will experience Chias HaMesim.
Great, great. And while my last question, in any case, when we started studying Tanya, I understood the animal soul, the klepa, was an evil disposition. You're saying it's the will to survive, because we need to overcome that to then have grace. Let's use that term. So again, that tells me that it's not necessarily evil, but there's something demonstrative about the need to survive, makes us competitive to want to survive.
Correct. And maybe when the situation arises and you don't have the better part of yourself telling you that it's not appropriate to do, you're going to take the water, the little bottle of milk from that child that's walking on the street because you're thirsty.
Right.
So it's the instincts to survive is positive. It's self-survival. It's positive. We can take the ego or the self-preservation and make it into evil. Evil is a derivative of the ego, but ego itself is not evil.
Correct. Right. No, that's great. That really helps me when I now put that within the context of understanding the good and the bad relative to what we have. It's 11 o'clock.
Okay.
Everybody, again, I think Rabbi Pinson was really an excellent presenter that gave us a lot of questions. I wish we had more scholars and residents, and maybe we should ask Rabbi Smith for that. But you can all find more information about Rabbi Pinson on the internet and the numbers of books that he has written, and they're all available on Amazon. So thank you for being friends with Rabbi Smith and for allowing us to be a part of your the discussion today, and we wish you a good life. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll see the rest of us, I guess, at 3 o'clock. Thank you. Hello, Rabbi. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Thank you.